Sponsored by Suzuki.
In the Irish Midlands, a small river known as the Little Brosna once marked the division of the ancestral lands of the Egan clan from those of the O'Carrolls. Today, it still forms part of the border between counties Tipperary and Offaly. It is one of two rivers which flow through the domain of Birr Castle, among the most famous and impressive of Ireland's great houses. The castle is situated in the town of Birr, whose formal layout has led to it being described as a model Georgian town. It has won many awards for its well-maintained streets, buildings and shopfronts. However, it is as a historical town that Birr is perhaps most famous.
Behind me are three objects that sum up the cultural diversity of the town of Birr. First, in the bushes there, is a Sephon stone, known as Umbilicus Hibernii, the navel stone of Ireland, because it's supposed to mark the very dead centre of the island of Ireland. And during penal times, it's said that masses were said at that rock. Then there's the lovely little town hall, St. John's Hall, which was built in 1833 as the town hall, and now, appropriate enough, is Birr's heritage centre. And then finally, there's the statue of William Parsons, 3rd Earl of Ross, probably the most famous member of the distinguished Parsons family, who still live here and have lived here since the 17th century.
The first member of the Parsons family to come to Birr was Sir Lawrence. He built a castle in 1620 on the site of the old O'Carroll Keep, and from that time the town of Birr became known as Parsonstown. In the early 19th century, the 2nd Earl of Ross had the castle remodelled in the Gothic style, as was the fashion of the time. He added the impressive entrance gates, Gothic arches, windows, and a 2-storied porch. Very little has changed architecturally since that time.
Hello.
Hello.
Lovely to see
Lovely
you.
to see you. Come in. Come in.
Thank you. Good to see
Welcome
you.
back.
Thank
Just
you very
a
much
year
indeed.
after you were last here.
Yes.
The estate is currently run by Brendan Parsons, 7th Earl of Ross, and his wife Alison. Together, they represent the 14th generation of the Parsons family to live and work at Birr. The private residence of Brendan and Alison Parsons is a blend of 18th and 19th century design.
Yeah, come into the room of feasts.
Thank you.
There we are.
This music room, or saloon, is probably one of Birr's most celebrated interiors, with its tent-like Gothic vaulting and gold flock Victorian wallpaper.
Okay.
It was one of the projects of Sir Lawrence Parsons, the great builder of the family.
Now here we have this picture we've just had conserved of the 2nd Earl, or Sir Lawrence Parsons, as he was better known, the Patriot politician in Grattan's Parliament, great anti-unionist amongst other things,
Well, good for him.
and who came down to Birr after he was so disenchanted with the passage and the corruption used to push the Union through. He devoted most of the rest of his life to building. And
So he's going to hang here in the middle of his own handiwork.
well, I think it's
How
most
appropriate.
appropriate that he should hang here in the room that he built in the
Absolutely.
very beginning of the 19th century, about 1803 to 1805, I think.
Much of the original interiors were restored by the present Earl's mother, who was a devoted conservationist of period furniture and decor. Before coming to Birr, Anne, Countess of Ross, had been married previously. She had a son, Anthony, who was to make a not insignificant match in marriage. Princess Margaret and her husband made many trips to Ireland, and especially to Birr, where they stayed on a number of occasions. Like all old houses, Birr Castle has its share of treasures and curios. One of the most interesting family heirlooms is a 17th century cookbook and medicinal log, which was kept by Dorothy Parsons and is still used by Alison today.
Wonderful artichokes. So
Yes.
this is the book.
Yes, yes. The book was written or compiled by one of the wives, Dorothy Parsons, and she's written here, Dorothy Parsons, her book of choice receipts, all written with her own hand in 1666.
Yes, but those are most especially excellent that are marked with EP, being all approved and tried by your lady Liz Parsons in her lifetime. Not that she's been
Yes.
doing too much cooking
That was-
afterwards.
Well, that was her aunt, I think.
Or aunt, I
Yes,
see.
probably, yes.
Yes.
So there's one very good one here for bruising ye cods.
Oh, I can feel it. What do we do?
You
Take diacal Scipius, oil of elders,
melt them in a saucer and spread it upon a cloth. Well, I think I'll leave it after
laying
that.
it to ye place, being first anointed with ye oil of elders. If ye oil of elders be too hot, use instead thereof oil of roses. I dread to think what happened if ye oil was too hot. Well, how reassuring to be surrounded by generations of family, I think.
Well, I'm not sure reassuring for me. It was rather more overpowering when one was a kid here
Yes.
and one was reminded by one's father about what each of the forebears did, that he was the great builder of the telescope and how he won his képi or the blue ribbon that you see him wearing there.
Yes, the night of St. Patrick,
night
St.
of-
Patrick's blue, and he has the star as well.
Illustrious, so we still have that
Yes.
star, which is really
How
rather
lovely,
lovely.
yes.
The first person who is supposed to be knighted specifically for service to science, it's rather nice.
It certainly is, yes.
William Parsons, 3rd Earl of Ross, is probably the most famous member of the family by virtue of his design and construction of the Great Telescope. Built in 1845, it remained until the end of that century the largest in the world. The 17-metre tube and 15-metre walled housing took 2 years to build. It was constructed using local materials and was built entirely by the local townspeople of Birr. By the time the present Earl took over in 1980, the telescope had fallen into disrepair, so he launched a major restoration project which has brought it back into full working order. Today, visitors are encouraged to visit the domain and to appreciate the local craftsmanship and engineering of this remarkable piece. The Great Telescope, or the Leviathan of Parsonstown as it was known, is the jewel in the crown of the Burr Scientific Foundation. Because of the relatively unknown achievements of not only the Parsons family, but Irish scientists in general, Brendan Parsons decided to build a living, working memorial to them.
Okay. David, this is the courtyard to the old coach house and stable block that Mary Ross designed and built. Come in.
Thank you.
And that we've now transformed into Ireland's Historic Science Centre.
Well, it's certainly quite a transformation from stables to an exhibit commemorating science. And what I particularly like about it is that it does really celebrate Ireland's contribution to science, because you have the poets and the dramatists, the playwrights and so on. Rarely hear about the wonderful things Irish people have done in science.
That's exactly what we're trying to do here, to give recognition, belated recognition to the achievements of all the Irish men and women who have made great discoveries and inventions in science and technology. We feel the time has come to give credit to them, and that's what we're trying to do here in the centre.
In the field of Irish science and technology, the achievements of the Parsons family alone are truly groundbreaking. While the scale of the 3rd Earl's telescope itself is impressive, it was the design of the enormous mirror inside which revolutionized the field of astronomy. It took Sir William over 20 years of laborious research before he perfected the design of the 6-foot, 3-ton polished metal mirror which really opened up the sky at night. Up until then, astronomers had seen faint clouds in the sky which they called nebulae. But with his telescope, William was able to see that they had a spiral form which suggested motion, but on a scale larger than anything anyone had conceived of before. Garrett Scaife is the former Professor of Mechanical Engineering at Trinity College Dublin.
Well, what William had stumbled on was a new object entirely in the sky, and it was something that we now identify as a galaxy. In fact, with the latest instruments, we know that the sky is full of them, but they're all so distant and faint that it requires the greatest technology to see them. And he was the first person to see such an object, and he ushered in a whole new era of cosmology.
Sir William's wife, Mary, was a distinguished scientist in her own right. She was a pioneer in the field of photography, which was still then in its infancy. The contents of her laboratory, along with samples of her work, form a key part of the Science Centre's exhibits today.
Well, this is another change. It's like a workshop,
It
really,
is a
isn't
workshop,
Yes.
or an engineerium, as we like
Yes.
to call it, and it's the last of these galleries in which we try and show something of the impact, the achievement, the inventiveness of the third Earl's son.
Not surprisingly, all William and Mary's sons were interested in the field of science. Their eldest son, Lawrence, invented a machine for measuring the heat of the surface of the moon. However, it was their youngest son, Charles, who really set the world alight with his work in the field of steam propulsion. Charles Parsons developed the concept of a high-speed turbine to power an electrical machine which could not only harness the power of steam, but increase it over tenfold. In order to demonstrate the potential of the prototype, he built a small naval vessel which he called the Turbinia, and powered it with his own device.
Charles was not just an excellent inventor, he was a wonderful promoter of his inventions. And he chose a special occasion to promote his marine turbine. It was the Spithead Review to celebrate Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, and there were navies and battleships from all over the world present for the occasion. And in the middle of all of this, the Turbinia set out with flame and smoke belching from its funnels, and the fans and machinery screeching like a banshee as it zipped up and down the lines, shaking off any attempt by the naval boats to halt his behaviour.
Very soon it was adopted by all British battleships and transatlantic liners. The Parsons turbine became as well known to those involved in sea travel as the name Boeing would become for air travel.
In his lifetime, Charles Parsons was enormously famous. He was known by the man in the street, not only in Britain, but in America and all over the world. And I believe that had he lived later, he would have been a credible candidate for the award of a Nobel Prize, for example.
Yeah, and I suppose, in a way, wonderful as the telescope is, the invention of the steam turbine and its application in warships and steamships.
It certainly had the greatest impact
Yes.
on the 20th century of all the discoveries not only made at Burr, but I think possibly made in Ireland altogether, or certainly by an Irishman, which he certainly would have regarded himself as being exclusively. Do you see this cartoon, David? That's my favourite in the whole thing. Charlie, as the little child,
Yes.
a latter-day child, playing with boats in his bath. And there's one of a series of panels that we've put to try and sort of inspire the imagination of children.
Who would love that and identify with it, playing with boats in baths. Yeah?
It's one of the many pieces of creative display that have been thought up by the marvellous woman who has designed all this for us, Anne Scroop, a great woman from County Tipperary, just next door to us, who's thought up all this and in particular brought together these various elements of sciences and the arts.
Yeah. Well, I have to say you're remarkably resilient and bouncy and undamaged, because I was just thinking how many people are damaged by one famous parent. And you've had parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, all this immense achievement, and why aren't you crushed by it?
I feel generally pretty overpowered by it, I must say. I was made to feel overpowered by my father when, on the rare occasions, I sat at the table in the dining room, the big table with the parents, not the kids' table down the corner, and had him point out the ancestor who built the big telescope out there in the middle of the park, and the ancestor who invented the steam turbine, and this person who was the first great woman photographer, and this person who achieved this, that, and the other, and asked me, you know, what are you going to do? What are you going to contribute?
Do you know what you did? You recovered all their achievements, which were being sidelined, and that's a work of art in its way.
Well, I've tried to do this, but I haven't really contributed very much of my own yet. But I hope that at least I've done something to bring out the achievements of generations past.
The present Lord Ross has not confined his considerable fundraising talents to the Science Centre, which now attracts over 60,000 visitors a year. He has also successfully coordinated the restoration of the formal gardens at Birr.
We're now walking down the summer border, hopefully during this lovely
Which
summer
is
evening.
absolutely heaven.
And this it goes, as you see, round the outside of these lovely hornbeam cloisters that my parents designed to mark our marriage 65 years ago.
When the 6th Earl and his wife inherited Birr Castle in 1935, it heralded the beginning of a golden age for the estate. The previous Countess of Ross was a daughter of the Messel family of Nymans in Sussex, whose gardens were also world famous. It was no wonder, then, that she took such a passionate interest in the development of the estate gardens at Birr.
The box hedging to left and right of us follows the original 17th century design, dates back to the same time as the big box hedges here, and is all that was here leading up to the central glass house until my parents married and laid out the beautiful cloister with the urns in the centre here, the great formal seats to left and right, made in the initials of my parents, Michael Ross,
which is very romantic.
Anne Ross,
Yes.
looking lovingly at each other in the sunshine.
I think that is just heavenly. I didn't really know that the beaches were native Irish. I always assumed that they were.
British blow-in.
Oh my goodness me, how frightful!
One can imagine ourselves as monks walking down this cloister and peering in for a little meditation.
With our breviaries.
Yes.
And I think the sound of the rookery is so lovely. It's peaceful reassuring, and I'm sure the monks would have loved it.
I'm not sure there would have been rooks here then. I wonder.
Well, don't tell me they're British birds. I mean, I can't bear it. It's nothing sacred.
The creation of the formal gardens was just one of a large number of projects which the previous Lord and Lady Ross undertook.
It's very clever.
They were keen conservationists, and together they made many trips abroad in search of rare and exotic seeds to introduce to Birr. Today, Birr houses one of the greatest collections of Chinese and Himalayan plants and shrubs in the world. There are champion trees and a range of magnolias which bloom in spring and are considered to be one of the highlights of the Irish horticultural year. Brendan and Alison have worked ceaselessly to ensure that Birr is now botanically as well as scientifically an internationally renowned domain. Peter Hines is the head gardener at Birr.
We have over 3,000 species of rare and unusual plants represented here at Birr, and these plants would be representative of almost every country in the world, from China to Pakistan, the United States, Australia, as well as, of course, many native Irish plants. And the plants at Birr here would have been accumulated over, really, I suppose, the last 2 centuries, from the 5th Earl of Ross through to the current Earl's father. And of course, the current Earl himself continues that tradition of plant hunting and seed collecting throughout the world. And as I say, so just about every genus to be found in the world can be found here, in fact, at Birr. This part of the garden here, as I say, is very special for me, I suppose because in a way it represents what Birr is all about. We have some of the rarest trees and plants here situated in the river garden. We have the water itself. We have part formal and part informal. And there are those visitors who come to Birr who like the fussy parts of the garden, like the Millennium Gardens, the castle terraces. And there are others then who actually like to come into Birr and take the river walks, which are very luscious, leafy, banked riverways. And a lot of our more native Irish species are to be found there. And for me, all of this comes together, I think, in the river garden. I'm the 2nd generation of the family to work here at Birr. And while I came to Birr just about 5 years ago, my father, Martin, in fact, has been here working at Birr for just about 47 years. And he, in fact, is now the foreman and chief propagator here at Birr. So he looks after our plant collection and our seeds that comes from abroad. And I'm very proud to be working with him, and he undoubtedly is one of my best assets here from a point of view of him teaching me the old methods, the old ways, the traditional ways of gardening.
My main job is growing the seeds for Lord Ross that he collects in the wild. He goes to Nepal and South Africa and the different part, Atlas Mountain, different areas, and brings back those wild seeds. And then he'll bring them down to me, and I will take them from there and sow them into little trays. And sometimes they'll germinate fairly fast, maybe 4 or 5 weeks, more times 3 years. Now this is Magnolia delevei, very rare magnolia. His Lordship collected in Nepal. It's a very special plant which I grew from seeds. And this is the first cutting we're actually going to take from it. Hopefully it'll be successful from cuttings, but we think it will be. We're just going to take some and put them in. So we just snip it off like so. Cut a nodal cutting actually, nice soft nodal cutting. We just take away some of the foliage because it'd be too much for dehydration purposes. We remove some of it and we make a nice, neat nodal cutting. And we dip this in hormone powder, of course, and put it into half peat and half sand. And hopefully we should have good success.
This is one of my favourite views of the castle, David, particularly at this time of the evening, late evening, when the sun is on it from almost the north. And with the image, of course, the great horns to the north, as they're called, projecting from the telescope to the right.
And the flag, and the giant Weetabix all over the grass.
Just mown for our Georgian cricket match.
Oh, is that? Oh, yes, how lovely. Well, you inherited in 1980 with all these lovely death duties and problems and so on, and yet you've managed to keep together in an integral way the farm, the estate, all these wonderful scientific things. How did you do it?
With great difficulty, and I have managed to keep everything together. A great deal had to be sold. We had to start with a huge house sale of Christie's in order to raise money to pay off the banks, the accountants, the listers, the duty, the tax and everything else. But then trying to apply a little of what I was taught in the UN to analyse your assets, I realised that what makes Birr unique is not so much what's hanging on the castle walls, but the scientific heritage here that was something no one else seemed to have in Ireland. So I ventured into this. I'm not nearly as successful as I would like to be, but if one really believes something as I do,
yes.
It's great to find people who do support real effort, and one's got to put a great effort into keeping a place like this not just going, but going forwards.
Sponsored by Suzuki.